Welcome back to Undulations. In this fifth video, I'm going to talk in more detail about the sequencer on the electron model cycles. And one question would be, well, why save that for the last? And I'll just say that we've been using it in certain ways all along, just to sort of explore the other features of the device, how to make sounds, how to use the LFOs, how to use the effects. And then now we have all of that sort of at our command, and that's what we're going to sequence. And so in this video, let's learn more about how to do it. Now, to start with, there's a hierarchy of sequencing on the model cycles. And up at the very top level, you've got chains. And a chain is a chain of patterns so that you can make your patterns, store those on the device. Then a chain is a volatile, unstored thing that you do in a live situation or for a recording where that you say you want to do 3 passes of pattern A4 and then move to pattern B6, and you keep going like that and chain together a full song. So that's sort of at the top of the hierarchy. So a pattern is sort of the fundamental storage block on the model cycles. It's got presets, which we've discussed in past videos, one for each of the tracks. But then there's also sort of a pool of locking presets that allow us to swap out for a given step in a sequence, one preset for the existing one. And that gives a lot of versatility to the sounds that you can put in a song on the model cycles. But as an aside, I should say that preset locking on the model cycles is kind of the equivalent of sample locking on the model samples. But I think of sample locking on that other device as much more powerful, because with different samples brought into a track, you can make something that is as different as somebody's voice or a different instrument sound entirely. Something that is from an old album. You have so many different choices in terms of bringing samples in, whereas on the model cycles with preset locking, you can kind of achieve that by typical parameter locking. So sort of if you wanted to go from a preset to another preset, you could really just make all the dial changes and have that be part of your parameter locking. But I feel like the preset locking is a way to sort of encapsulate all of the changes that you might want to make and be able to think about it more clearly, where that you're going to go from this sound to this sound as like a discrete jump and not just migrate a bunch of the parameters. So I still really feel like preset locking on the model cycles is a powerful tool. Now, patterns, of course, also have the sequencing data, and that's a lot of what we're going to talk about today. But there continues to be a hierarchy where you've got the sequences, and then you've got the individual steps, the trigs that make up those sequences. And I want to say that while I talk about this as a sequencer, it's really more than that. Each track has basically got a sequencer. And the power of this track-based sequencing, as seen in the opening clip that I did, is that you can have each track with its own timing, with its own length. And so you can make phased track sequences of these different lengths and speeds that basically never repeat. So the pattern itself can become a lengthy composition. Now, this brings up the concept of what I think of as sort of at the very bottom of the hierarchy on the model cycles, which is conditional locking. So you've got chains potentially, you've got patterns, and then you've got the sequences. And then on the trigs, you have these conditions as you're going through the sequence. Will that trigger fire or will it not fire? And that depends on whether the condition is met or not. And as we'll learn, you can have not just note trigs, which is all I've used up until this point in the videos. You can also have locking trigs. So that's a step in the sequence where you're coming along and a note doesn't play, but the parameter value changes. And you can do all of that in grid recording mode. And You can do a lot of this stuff in live recording mode too. So I'm going to start by just showing some live recording stuff in just a second. But on conditional locking, I just want to say that it's in some ways one of the most powerful things about the model cycles and the model samples, because it enables you to have things like random events that not only, I mean, I think of random, well, maybe the note will play or the drum hit will play, maybe it won't, but you can have it chain together things where that basically an entire sequence of events within your sequence fire off. And so this is a way to make a lot of complex song structures that might have a random element to them or might not. And so just to give you an idea of how powerful this conditional locking stuff can be, as I was making this video, I started to think about the logical AND operation. Now, lots of times when you're doing logic either on a computer or in electronics, you've got true states, false states, you've got ands, ors, nands, that type of thing. And so I thought, well, I guess an or is, you might be able to work that out with some of the things that were existing. I'll show that along the way, but the one thing that didn't really seem that clear to me was how to do a logical AND. I don't want to jump too far ahead about how to do it, but basically what it is that instead of just one event that you can set a probability on, so like does a note play or not, I've just decided that you could do two events in a row and they both have to be true. And so the first event triggers a note and yet it's at 0 volume, and then the second event triggers whether the volume gets raised or not, so it determines whether you can hear the note or not. Now I set these two things at a chance of 4%, so not a very big chance at 4% for one of them, really not a big chance that they're both going to happen in a row. So it turns out that the average time between this event actually making a sound was something like 12 minutes. So let me show you a time-lapse version of a timer from the time that I start the video to the time that the first sound is made. And then now take a look at the spacing of these. This Audacity trace is 2.5 hours long. And if you calculate the sort of the average space between the sounds, it's something like 12 minutes. Now, why would you need that? Maybe you're doing an installation art piece or something like that. You could drop those conditions down to 1% on both of them and have events that are several hours apart. And you could have, that only takes up 2 trigs on one track. You could have a whole array of different things that are occurring several hours apart and independently, maybe related. And so I feel like this is the sort of thing that is just the tip of the iceberg for the musical applications of the conditional locking on the model cycles. Now, before we get into what can be sort of the meticulous work of grid recording with parameter locking and preset locking and conditional locking, let's do something that's a little bit more like musical and open. It's a way that this thing is very powerful. Let's do some live recording. Okay, so the limitation on live recording is going to be my finger drumming and playing. So that said, you know, watch Sean Wasabi or something like that, who, by the way, I have never brought him up, but I would not be doing this if it were not for Sean Wasabi, who I just saw some of the amazing stuff that he did, and fascinated by the controller that he had, which was a MIDI fighter. I ended up getting a MIDI fighter, watching a bunch of Mad Zach videos, which I really liked a lot. And so sort of brought me into a whole different aspect of electronic music and YouTube and that sort of thing. So anyway, enough of that. Let's see where we're at. What I've done, I cleared things out, got initialized sounds, except over here on track 4, I've got the boat sound, and we're gonna just like play one note with that eventually. But to start with, for live recording, it's always a good idea to sort of think about some of the other menus, like what you've got going on. Like right now, I've got the fixed velocity on. If you were really wanting to do the finger drumming, then probably want to have fixed velocity off to get more volume variation. And then over here at the tempo, I think what I'm going to do to give myself a little bit of a break is to turn that down to 60, so half tempo, and then we'll try and turn that back up to see how that sounds. Next, think about that over here, if I'm playing this, but maybe want to have a melody that I do eventually, maybe I don't like where that's at for the notes on the trig keys. You can certainly go into the track menu and do the keyboard transpose. So say I wanted to have all the trig keys be an octave lower. That is easy, and we would have that. So that's probably still gonna be fine. I might use something up here. And then you might want to have some retrigger settings on the various tracks. I'm not going to get involved in that since we've covered that a lot before. And then two of the most important things for what we're doing right now are quantization and the scale page. So let's take a look at both of those. Quantization is just here under the punch, and you can do either global quantization or per track quantization, and that'll change depending on where I'm at. And then you can apply the quantization that you've done. So that's one part of it, is to just sort of lock it in and then be able to quantize later stuff at a different level. And then this setting is for live recording, do you have the quantization on or off? And I'm going to leave it off, and maybe we'll go in and try and scoot some stuff around by quantizing to make the timing better. But we'll get out of that and then look at the scale page. Right now we're in pattern mode, and that means that all of the tracks are going to be 16 trigs long, so that's the length. And then the scale, that 1x, means that we're going to be at that 60 BPM. And so these are basically 16 16th notes at 60 BPM. And so you can change that scale setting. And we'll do that on the hi-hat after we've done the first two tracks. And then the last thing before we get going is the click track. I'm going to turn that on, and I'm going to leave the volume at 100. I think that'll be good. And then it's going to have a count in also. Not sure that I really want that. I'm going to turn that off so that I'll probably use an entire pass of the sequence as a count in. So that will help, and I think we're good. So in the past we've done grid recording where you push the record button and then you enter the trigs in manually like that. In this case, what you do, you get on, if you're playing from the pad, you can do it from any track, but if you're doing it from the trig keys, you get on the track that you want and you hit record and then play. So you can hear the metronome in there. And you can hear me off there relative to the click. And then there's no harm in going to look. All right, how far off am I? That one's on, that one's on, that one's on. This one's not on. There's no harm in just doing a little bit of editing there. Okay, so we scooted that over. So these are still not going to be precisely on those, but that's where we can address that with the quantization. But I just put this one dead on to sort of speed us along here. Now, we've got this. I'm going to go ahead and hit record too. And what we really want to make sure is that we don't just hit track 2 to start doing the snare. You need to hold the track button down and then hit track 2. So what that does is does it silently so it isn't recorded. I'm going to try to put a snare drum in the offbeat. And then we'll look at that. Okay, not awful. All right, so this is what we've got, such as it is, with the kick and the snare. And what I want to do is add in the hi-hat, but using the scale page, I want to make it slightly different. And what I want to do is, first thing, take a look at the scale page. If we see the mode is set for pattern, so that any changes that I make to the hi-hat right now would be made on the other 2 tracks. So what we want to do is press the level button once to get it to track mode. And that means that all the other stuff's going to stay the same, but on the hi-hat track, I can change the length to over 16. And just to point out, right now we've only got 1 page. As soon as I go to 17 trigs, there are 2 pages. It's only got 1 trig on it. And then this number tracks with what we're doing here. And that can go out to 64, but I'm going to follow along with 32. And then, as per something that was suggested in the manual, I'm going to go to 2x on the timing. So that's basically going to make these 32 30-second notes. So this hat track is going to have the same length in terms of timing as the kick drum and the snare drum, but the granularity of the recording is going to be finer. And let me just check that sound. Yeah, so I just want sort of a click, and maybe I'll even give everything a little bit of reverb. And so we're going to just start recording. And we're still at 60 BPM, but I'm just going to do something kind of simple. And that's going to be fine for what I'm talking about. Let me stop this, and now we can do the same thing where we inspect what's been done on the different pages. But to do that now, we've got to be able to first check page 1, which we're at there, so it's tut 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 tut. And then if I go to page 2, it's tut 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 tut. Timing is different, but fine, that's as good as I'm gonna do on this. And so okay, so now let's listen to it and change the quantization as we are hearing it. And I'm going to do global quantization. And you can think of this as just sort of gradually dragging the notes closer and closer to their homes. And then if I think that that still doesn't quite repair the way things ought to be, then I can go in, make sure I'm on that second page, and I'm going to just shift these guys to match the first page. So this is the first page here. I'm going to just put that one there and put that one there. And then I think I'll go ahead and just so that we can have a little bit of difference, I'm going to put a starting hat here, and I'll put another hat right here. Okay. And so this is perfectly valid to do live recording and then do a little bit of editing along the way. Okay, so from there, let's throw in the tonal part that I had, this boat sound. And I might turn the level down a little bit on that. So what I want to do is show you that you can do live recording of parameters as well. To start with, I'm going to turn on the sequence live recording. And when it comes back around, I'm just going to hit a note. Turn that level down even a little bit more. Okay, so let's stop, see what that looks like. Just 2 notes. All right, pretty reasonable timing, so I'm not going to edit that. So that's what we've got right now. But next, let's go ahead and live record a parameter change. I think what I want to do is let's see what this sweep setting is, 64. Okay, so what I'm going to try to do is send that up and down during the course of the sequence. But one thing to really look out for, what I was just doing, I'm changing the, what was that? That was the sweep setting. All right, you don't want to change parameters sort of like while you're trying to just figure out what they ought to be. You don't want to change them while you're live recording. That leads to all kinds of headaches. So get sort of your default settings where you want them to be, pitches, that sort of thing, and then do the live recording of them. So let's start off. All right, so we've added a little bit of dynamics to that, and then I'm going to do a little bit of wobbling of the pitch too. Okay, so I'm happy with that. Let's turn things off, and the thing to do, let's look, and this is where it's good to start talking about lock trigs, all right, because we're on track 4, and when I turn on grid mode, what is going on here? Now, we've still got 16 trigs total, but these 2 are doing some sort of flashing that's different, and these guys are doing this slow flash. All right, these are lock trigs. Trigs that do that slow flash are a lock trig, and this is not, I probably just missed it, came in a little bit late with the turning the knob. So that one's just a plain note trig. It's solid. This is both. Now, quick aside, if you want to get rid of a lock trig, it's not hard to do. You hold it down, and then you check to see what parameters are actually locked on it. In this case, it's just the pitch. And so you roll that knob a little bit to sort of highlight that, and then you hit clear. And so it says clear pitch locks. And then the last thing, I may as well just say that if you want to add a lock trig, you can hit function and push the trig button, and it'll start this one blinking, but now there's no parameter locked on it. It's basically an empty trig that I could, for example, change the pitch on. Okay, so let's just listen to this and see how it all sounds. Okay, and last thing is going to be, do we want to change the tempo or not? I kind of like that driftiness to it. I don't think 120 would make any sense. So maybe 90. Like it slow. Okay, so hopefully that gives some insight into how to do live recording on the model cycles. Okay, so now I want to do sort of a speed run through the fundamentals of grid recording. To go into grid recording mode, we hit record, and so these are the trigs for whatever track is lit, and I'm going to just do some really fundamental stuff here with kick drum, and we can listen to it while we put it together. Then I'm going to move over to the snare. Now, you don't have to push track on this because we're not recording, but I tend to do it anyway. And we're going to put the snare in, and I'll put a little extra over here. And then move over to the hat, and I'm going to just put a bunch in there. And so it's pretty fast to get it up and running. Now, one thing I want to do in reference to the last video about re-triggering is go here, and this is the trig repeat menu. Now, not the re-trigger menu. I'm going to turn it on, and I'm going to make it faster. Not quite as long. And give it a big fade. Okay, and so you can kind of hear that fade out. And then the next thing I want to do is put a chord in and do some parameter locking on that. So I'm going to do something like one of the first things to think about locking, and I don't necessarily think of it as parameter locking, but I guess it is just what note do you want it to be. So you can hold the trigger down, and then you've got these this trig menu to go from. So if I want that to be a D, for example, okay, and then over here, maybe I want this to be a little bit more of a ghost note, so I can come down to the velocity, lower that. And then start delving in a little bit into some of the parameters. Maybe I want it to be shorter here too. And then I can just start changing some of the other FM parameters as well. And with the chord machine, you can get some nice chord progressions and that sort of thing. Okay, and then I think this is a good time to start talking about one type of conditional trig, which is the fill condition. And we've got a button over here. This is the page button, but it's also the fill button. And so if you're not in record mode, like grid recording mode, or you don't push the function key, this is actually the fill button. And what does that mean? Think of it as just a sort of logical condition. Is it pushed or is it not? And so that's just, are you in a fill mode or are you not in a fill mode? And if it isn't pushed, then you're not in a fill mode. And what you can do, let's say that we want to go to the kick drum and really make it heavier on all the even beats, on all the odd beats, and yet on the new ones that I put in, I'm going to give them a conditional lock, which you've seen me do this with the percentages, so sort of a probabilistic condition. But this fill condition, which is the very first one, that's just, are we in a fill or are we not? And so I'm going to do that on every one of these. And right now, when I turn it and it's not lit up, not dark, that just means that it's sort of unset. But then as soon as it turns dark, that means that it is in a fill conditional lock. Okay, so I'm going to turn off grid recording and we'll see how this sounds. All right, so that's just a way to bring that extra kick drum beat in. But then maybe for another effect, we want to take out the chord. And to do that, what I'll do is go back into the grid recording mode, and I'm gonna, they're flashing because of parameter locks, but I'm gonna put a conditional lock on there of not fill. So that means that this will play when we're not in fill mode, but that also means that it won't play when we are in fill mode. So you can think of it as sort of three states. There are things that are unaffiliated. They're going to play whether you're in fill mode or not. And then some are going to play when it's not pushed. So like the chord's going to play. As soon as I hit fill, it's going to take out the chord and put in the other kick drum. All right, so that's sort of the basics of grid recording and just putting trigs in, changing the notes to what you want, doing parameter locks, and using fill as a type of conditional lock. And so now we're just going to keep on going and explore some of the other conditional locks, and you'll see a lot of the power that you can get out of this. Okay, so the next thing I want to talk about is the chance knob and a couple of other different types of conditional trigs. One, the neighbor condition, and the other is just the percentage, so the chance condition. And so there's a little bit of terminology confusion. There's a chance knob, that is for an entire sequence. We'll see that. But then there are also the percentage chance conditions that can go on an individual trig. Now, to start this off, I'm just going to put a bunch of kick drums in, like so, and then I'm going to come over to the snare drum, and on the beat, I'm going to put a neighbor trig condition. So I've put them on, we're in grid mode, and I'm just going to continue to turn the knob as we go through fill and not fill, pre and not pre. So here's the neighbor condition. So set it there, set it there, and I'll show you in a second how you can just copy and paste trigs, and that's a little bit faster, but for now this is fine. So those are all set for the neighbor trig condition. Now, what is the neighbor? For track 2, its neighbor is track 1. It's always one on the left or one less. So 6's neighbor is 5, etc., down to 2 having a neighbor of 1. 1 doesn't have a neighbor, and I don't think it wraps around. When I hit play on this, though, all we're going to hear is that kick drum. Now, the reason for that is that what neighbor does is it looks for a trig that's true on the neighbor track. And since for the kick drum right now we don't have any conditions on this track, and that means that there's nothing true, nothing false, and so track 2, those 4 snare drum hits are just never going to play. Now, one thing that you might think you could do, and I thought this, is just change the chance on the track. Okay, so say I make it 50%. All right, that'll give a nice sound on the kick drum. But as you can hear, there aren't any snare drum hits there. So that's something I want to clarify, is that the track chance knob, that setting, which is basically making everything, all the trigs on here, operate at 50% likelihood, the way that I have it set, those don't count as trig conditions or as conditional trigs that are considered for either pre or not pre, or for the neighbor or not neighbor conditions. So how do we fix this? All right, I'm going to turn that off, and I'm just going to get rid of these and change this one to be 50%. All right, there we go. And I'm going to make sure to turn the overall track chance back to 100. Now, this is 50% for that trig. You can see that there's a light there, so it's definitely changed. And if you inspect it, it shows what it is. Now, what I want to do is hold down the trig and press function and copy. All right, so that copies that one. And then now I can just do function paste. And not only is that turning the trig on, it's going to inherit all of the other features, which in this case is just the chance of 50%. So that's a way to copy and paste trigs. So now what I'm saying is that these are going to actually be evaluated as trig conditions that are either true or false. And so those are going to trigger the neighboring snare drum. So let's listen. Okay, and so now I'm just going to add a couple of other things. First is going to be to go to the kick drum track, and let's do a preset lock. To do that, what I'm going to do, I'm going to hold down, say, this one, and then if I do function and enter the preset menu, I can dig down into, say, another kick drum here, maybe like bold. We'll do that, and as soon as I lock that in, what it's going to do is show up here as lit. So that means that when you press a trig, you can see what it has locked on it by looking around, and this one's the only one with preset lock. So preset locking is just that easy, where that you can go in and tune to a different preset, and you have, I think, up to 24 different presets that you can access like that. So you can have 30 presets in all. That would be 6 for this, and then 24 others. So if you wanted to have 24 trigs with 24 different presets playing on them, you could do that, or some other mix across tracks. And then I figure I should show another interesting type of parameter lock, and that is the reverb send. I'm going to parameter lock the reverb send here, and turn the reverb up. So now the only thing with reverb on this whole track is this trig here. And sometimes it'll hit, sometimes it won't. So that can be a nice way to spice up a sequence with the different sends, reverb and delay. And with that in mind, I'm going to come over here and put a chord on. I'll have this one send delay. Okay, so now we're starting to get a good handle on conditional locks, and for the last thing in this video, I just want to keep going with that and make some different things. And I really hope that everybody's getting a sense that you can put a lot of time and detail into sort of sculpting a particular pattern, and even though it might only be 16 trigs long, there can be a lot of variety, a lot of flexibility to it. And so when you think about combining that, you know, say I liked this and then I copied it to another pattern and changed it slightly, and then I used chaining to sort of put a few different blocks together, you're getting up to something that is the length of a song. So it's a lot to sort of think about, and it leads to a whole lot of musical creativity. So let's get on with it. All right, last thing here, I want to show another usage of conditional presets, including the pre and not pre conditions. So to do that, let's go over to the kick drum track, and what I want to do is start by changing the length of these patterns. And so I want to have track mode set, and then set the length of the kick drum pattern small down to 2. And then I'm going to come over to the snare drum, and I'm going to set that to 8. And then I'm going to leave the hat just as it is at 16 for now. Okay, let's come out of this, go back to the kick drum, and then go into edit mode. None of these are viable because it's only a pattern of 2, and I'm going to put one kick drum hit right here at the very front, and for that I'm gonna give it a likelihood of 50%. And so that sounds like this. And let me turn off grid mode. You can see the pattern is sort of crazy over here, very small. Now, for the snare, I am gonna come over here. We need to work in the first 8. And so I'm gonna leave 1 off, and then I wanna have 2, 4, and 5, and then 7 and 8. Now, what I'm gonna do is use the neighbor condition on this one, actually the not neighbor. So then if a trig on the kick drum, which is the neighbor, plays, then no snare drum. But if the kick drum doesn't hit, that'll be a not neighbor condition, because we're using the chance over there on the kick drum. And so that means that this snare drum will hit. And so they're sort of going to exclude each other, where kick drum hits, snare drum doesn't hit, and vice versa. But then down here on these, I want to have, for the other snare hits, I want to have pre and pre. So this is going to be these two hitting if this one does. And then down here, I want to have not pre and not pre. And so that's going to make it to where these don't hit if this one does. I want to make sure I get all the logic right as I'm saying this, but maybe it's better just to listen to what we have at this point. So it's a lot going on, but really it's just that first single hit over here on the kick drum that determines whether it's going to be a snare hit and then 2 more snare hits, or no snare hit and then 2 later snare hits. And so we're getting a lot of variety out of that just by very little work. And now to keep things going, I'm going to go over to the hat, and I'm going to leave that at 16. But let me go ahead and put a pattern in that I have notes on. So 1, skip 1, 1, 2, 3, skip 2, 1, skip 2, 1, 2, skip 2, 1. All right, so that would be like this. But what I want to do on the hat track is slow it down. And so to do that, we're going to go over to the scale setup and come down to the scale setting, and I'm going to go to 1/4. And this is just sort of the vibe I was going for with this. Let's check it out. I'm going to use the mute here so you can hear that. I don't know if we talked about mute very much, but if you press function and then a pad, so hold function, hit a pad. So it's very slow on the hat there. And then what I want to do is add a retrig, or rather a trig repeat. So to do that, I'm holding the trig down on the hat, and then hit this, the retrig button, and then I'm going to go up, turn it on, and then make it a 30-second. And I'm going to leave the length at 1/4, and then I'm going to max that fade out. So it does that. All right, and then what I'm going to do, I'm going to get rid of number 12 and then do the copy and paste that back over there. Okay, so now let me get out of record and bring in the other Okay, and then now I want to add in some LFOs. So let's isolate the tracks by muting. And I'm going to go over to track 1. So it's just doing that. And we're going to use the LFO here, random. I'm going to take the mult down to 1, and I'm going to send it to the pitch and give it just a little bit of pitch variety, maybe a little bit more. All right, not quite a whole tone. All right, now let's go over to the, I'm going to mute the kick, go to the snare drum, go over to the snare drum track, and the LFO on that, let's make random, same multiplier, and then in this case go to the distortion and give it a fair amount of that. Maybe even a little bit more. And then I think I want to bring that little bit of the sizzle in on the snare. Okay, so we'll stick with that. Then same deal, mute snare, go to hat, and then go to the hat track. For this, I want to do something that I normally don't do, which is some panning. We'll just do same timing, multiplier 1x, and then destination pan, and bring it up to something like, say 25. Okay, so that's given us some dynamic variety there on what we got going. And let me turn on the mutes here and here. And I think, as pretty much always, it's good to bring in some reverb. I think I want the decay on that hat to be a little bit longer. All right, room bigger on the reverb. I'm going to just turn the level down on the hat. Might go a little deeper with the kick drum, but I feel like for a video, I'm going to keep it up in case people are on their phones. Last thing, let's go over to the chord. I'm going to choose a chord. I like this number 10. That ought to be reverbed. Yeah, let's add some delay. I think the timing's good, but let's boost the feedback. All right, so it's kind of mellow, maybe a little bit soundtrack-ish. I'm just gonna play for a minute. All right, so that's 5 videos about the model cycles, and I really enjoyed working with it. I think that the sequencer, which we looked at in this video, is very powerful, and there's a lot of different ways to work with it. I'm doing some things my way. The manual has got a lot of detail about it, and of course, everybody's going to have their own different workflow and intentions for it. And so I feel like that's going to be a good place to leave from that. If anything comes up that you have a question about, I might be able to answer it. You can leave that in a comment and I will get back to you about it. Now, speaking about comments, somebody just left me one the other day. I wish you did more videos. And honestly, I wish I did more videos too. And I think one way to do that is try and do more videos that are shorter. And so that's going to be a goal moving forward. Some of the stuff in my state has calmed down a little bit more normal now. And so I think I'm going to try to get back to diverse topics, short videos, and not to say that I won't do any deep dives of tutorials or that sort of thing, but even try to sort of subdivide those. So I don't know, today's video would have maybe been 2, possibly even 3 shorter videos. And then that's going to be a more regular thing to upload and kind of keep me on a mode of like basically working on the videos at least part of the day all the time, and do that instead of sort of a real crush to get a bigger one out and then taking a break from it to get caught up on the things that I wasn't doing during that. So I think that'll be good, and I don't know how long it's going to take me to sort of transition to this new type of thing, but I'm working on it. And to start with, the first thing that I want to do is take a look at a little synth, the Basel Castle, and it's something that I'm quite familiar with. And so that in itself, it's like when I work with a new thing like the model cycles, there's like a learning curve and everything that goes along with that. But something like this, which, you know, I don't know that anyone can tap the depths of the castle, but I do know quite a bit about it, and I've enjoyed interacting with people on Instagram about it. So next video or 2 I want to do is going to be on that, and try and tie in some computer code and machine learning type stuff. Nothing too fancy, but just a different angle on making music and sounds. And so that's going to be upcoming. And now to close this video out, I did want to do something with the model cycles, but have it paired with something. I've been playing this thing alone for 5 videos straight. I don't know that I think I've run it through an effect pedal, but never really had it go with anything else. And this is going to be a stretch. It's going to be a little bit weird. There were some birds outside of my window at like 5 in the morning, and I was not up early, I was up late, and those birds sounded great. So I recorded them on my field recorder, and something about them made me want to slow it down to be able to hear it better. And there's sort of a natural echo where I'm at just from buildings and that sort of thing. So that when you slow something down, it also slows the reverb tail down, so it sounds like an actual reverb. So I'm not really adding any effects to these birds. I have just slowed them down by a factor of 8. And sounds pretty wild, and I'm gonna put some model cycles, kind of a little bit of drums and some melodic stuff along with it. See what you think. All right, thanks a lot for watching, and I will see you soon in the next one.